so many other cultures have so much to offer, but we don't really frame coffee as for those people, even though it's so often from them. And I'm excited for that possibility, and I hope that what we're doing really presents the idea of saying, like, we have so much to learn from origin, instead of framing origin as a place we need to save, though there are things that need to be corrected. And I want to live in a world where the rest of that dopeness gets to come to the forefront, you know?
Well, hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and as always, I'm really just glad you're here, glad you're supporting the show and listening. Great episode in store for you, a great history of the coffee shop and the movement of Cxffeeblack with our guest Bartholomew Jones. So I can't wait to share that with you. And if you're new to the show and this is one of the first episodes you're listening to, just know that there are, at this point, close to 900 episodes that we've published over the last 7 years, going on 8 years. You can get plugged into all of that and search by topic in a podcast player or online. You can go to keystotheshop.com and find information there on the episodes that we've published. You can also, like I said, subscribe to the show, and we always encourage you to start by searching the topic that's most relevant and urgent for you in the moment as an operator of a coffee shop or a coffee professional in the cafe. That's what, after all, Keys to the Shop is all about providing you, are these resources in the forms of stories, inspirational stories like Bartholomew Jones's today and other Founder Friday episodes. We have deep dive topics on finances, on management, leadership, coffee, workflow, and things like that, and everywhere in between. So again, get plugged in by subscribing to the show. Also on YouTube, because, hey, I'm waving to you right now here on the YouTube channel over at Keys to the Shop. So thank you very much. Now, the best thing you can do to support the show, by the way, is share Keys to the Shop with your friends, your network over on any kind of social media platform that you have out there. Our main ones are LinkedIn and Instagram. So if you share that way, or even on Facebook, that would be awesome, because that makes more people aware of Keys to the Shop. Now, really quick, Keys to the Shop also offers consulting and coaching for you and your business and your team, your leadership team. I've worked with many people over the last 5-6 years. I think at this point, we're over 65 different businesses. And I would love to explore what working one-on-one with you would look like. Let's see how Keys to the Shop consulting can help you level up your operations, people, and quality, whether you're just getting into coffee or you want to level up, again, like I said, your existing operations. There's a lot of ways we can provide solutions for you and help you really thrive as an operator. All you need to do is email chris@keystotheshop.com, and we'll set up a free discovery call. And also know that, the isolating nature of being an owner, if you're a cafe owner of a number of years and you feel the need to get a broader perspective and want to be a part of a community that is going to help you not only with accountability, but with insights and solutions for things that you're going through, we have created key holder coaching groups just for that purpose. This is a mastermind style coaching group. Is all about other coffee shop owners gathering together over 6 months regularly to focus on each other's issues and problems and opportunities to make great decisions and to grow as people, grow as leaders, and grow their businesses. So email chris@keystotheshop.com, because applications are open right now. You can follow the link down in the show notes or in the description below here on YouTube. And let's have a conversation. The selection for people in this next cohort is going to be happening in the kind of mid-September range, the beginning of September. So time is of the essence. If you want a space for yourself in this transformative group, then email chris@keystotheshop.com. Put your application in today. So now our sponsors today for Keys to the Shop are the Ground Control Brewer over at groundcontrol.coffee, as well as the Barista Series line of plant-based performance beverages over at pacificfoodservice.com. And we're going to have more information on those wonderful companies later on in the episode. But right now, I want to introduce you to today's guest, Bartholomew Jones. And Bartholomew Jones is an emcee. He's a coffee nerd, multi-hyphenate creative. Alongside his wife, Renata Henderson, he is the co-founder of Cxffeeblack. and co-owner of the Anti-Gentrification Cxffee Club, which is a coffee educational center and cultural hub located in Memphis, Tennessee. Soon a cafe. Founded in 2018, Cxffeeblack is a community-oriented, multidisciplinary, education-based coffee company that became a trailblazer in the coffee industry by creating an entirely Black coffee supply chain from Ethiopia to Memphis, Tennessee. And this is the first of its kind. Cxffeeblack is on a mission to return coffee to its African roots. And in the process of this, as they build, want to create an equitable Black future. Not only is Bartholomew those things, but he's also a Sprudge 20 honoree, an annual list of the top 20 coffee influencers cultivated by Sprudge Media Network, which is a renowned international authority on coffee and its culture. And Cxffeeblack was one of the Coffee Coalition for Racial Equity's 2024 Innovator of the Year awardees. And so Bartholomew has been very busy in the last few years here building Cxffeeblack in different iterations. And we're going to get talking about what different phases look like for how this project has developed as we explore the before Cxffeeblack, how Bartholomew has been developing his sense around art and coffee and culture, what led to the founding of this company, and right now, what phase is Cxffeeblack in, what has been accomplished thus far, what's next, and what has happened and transpired that has really made an impact on community and the global coffee culture, because Cxffeeblack is not only something making a difference in Memphis, but worldwide. And I think this story should serve as an inspiration to many people who not only identify specifically with the mission of Cxffeeblack, but also with the idea that your business can accomplish great change for your community, and with a great mission at the center of what you want to accomplish through your business, staying true to that, but also leaving open the doors for contribution from the community to help you develop that thing is very key. And we're going to get into a lot of that in this conversation. I found this to be a really enriching interview, and I think you'll be inspired. So here now is my conversation with the founder of Cxffeeblack, Bartholomew Jones. All right, Bartholomew, welcome to Keys to the Shop. Glad to have you on the show.
Hey, man, it's good to be in the virtual building. You know what I'm saying? I'm grateful.
That's right.
Yeah.
I've been hearing so much. I mean, obviously, this is, for me, it feels like a long time coming, and I'm glad we can get on this call to just talk a lot about what your project Cxffeeblack has done, how it was founded, and what has developed in the last 5 years. It's been 5 years, right? 2019 was when you founded Cxffeeblack.
Yeah, I heard somebody say that ever since the pandemic, everything moves in dog years, and I felt that seriously. It doesn't feel like 5 years; it feels like we started last year. But yeah, it has been 5 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, you're a busy guy. So I want to just kind of dial back to the beginning of your introduction to coffee. In what I mean by coffee, it's not necessarily the beverage of coffee, but the concept of coffee as a commercial product that you started to really resonate with, sort of those beginning catalyst moments for Cxffeeblack. What moment was that for you, and how did this all kick off?
Yeah, I mean, there's several introductions over the course of childhood, teenage life. Like my first introduction was as a junior deacon at my church. So the cool thing about being a junior deacon, if you've never been to like a African American church, is that we're greeting people at the door, we're handing out the programs to tell people what the service is going to be like. And the coolest thing about it to me was that you got to leave service and like go get coffee. And so you could leave, it was like Folgers coffee or community coffee, like powdery cream, the powdered sugar. But it was cool to me, man. I was just like, this is a cool way to, one, stay awake, because I was notorious for like trying not to fall asleep at church. And then two, it was really cool because I had the opportunity to like make my own little experience. So I would get a lot of cream, the powdery cream, a lot of sugar, put like a little bit of coffee on it, mix it up. I used to call it a Frappuccino. So it was a cool experience for me. And then my dad would always at the house like push Kenyan coffee on us. So backstory on him is he went to a HBCU here in Memphis. They took a trip to Kenya when he was in college, and he came back just a fan of all things Kenyan. And so he was like always trying to get me to drink Starbucks Kenyan coffee at the house. Of course, I thought it was gross. I'm like, Dad, I don't want to drink that. Now we just built our first like black supply chain partnership with a Kenyan farming family who's importing their coffee to America. So it's a little full circle moment. But yeah, those were some of my first introductions to coffee as a kid.
That's awesome. Yeah, the church coffee thing is just it's still bad. I mean, it's better today, I suppose. There's more equipment out there, but that really is like in
Yeah.
everyone that has any association with church is just like, oh, I can't wait to leave church and go get good coffee at a coffee shop somewhere. But
Yep.
when you thought about coffee as you were kind of experiencing what your dad was pushing on you and this coffee, like eventually you were introduced to something that was more of the story of coffee instead of the product of coffee. And I imagine that's the foundation that was just like, well, I want to do something with this and not just drink it.
Yeah. I think the first coffee story I really got introduced to was probably Starbucks. I was like a high school kid, and I had this guy who was mentoring me, and so he used to take me to Starbucks. He was like this really skinny white guy, wore like fedoras and like tweed jackets. It was like into film, you know. So I guess he was like the first hipster guy I met. And still friends with him to this day, but he used to like take me to do all this like weird stuff that just folks didn't do in my neighborhood. So he would like take me to go to these coffee shops, or hey, I want you to listen to this like Les Mis soundtrack for this musical, and you're gonna need to know this one day because you're gonna be in college and you have to know what Les Mis is in like college networking. I never needed that, but you know, it was something that he was just trying to share his life, his culture, you know what I'm saying, with me. And so going to Starbucks was cool because like it kind of introduced this idea of like, this is a place for you to be creative. This is a place for ideas. This is a place for you to explore and to find yourself. And like, I was definitely not drinking coffee there. I was drinking like strawberry frappuccinos. But I think that notion of like basically a third space to me was really interesting. And Memphis is like a blue collar town, man. Like, people work in factories, or they have government jobs, or they're like, a teacher, maybe a doctor, but there's not really a creative economy here, at least not outside of music, And so, there's a history of the
Right.
blues, and you got 3 6 Mafia and stuff like that, but like kind of like a creative entrepreneur concept wasn't really present. And Starbucks introduced that to me, and so I'm grateful for that. And then that kind of got expounded upon when I went to college. I went to like a liberal arts college called Wheaton College, right outside of Chicago. And so,
Mm.
there's the influence of intelligentsia there and all these other kind of third wave pioneers. And so even in the suburbs, like there were these independent cafes, and that was new to me, and it was walkable, And so I'm walking to these cafes, and I'm finding myself really inspired by the opportunity to have a place to be creative. It's not me at the house writing because I'm a musician, right? I'm a rapper. So like it wasn't me working on my music, at the house or in the car or just sitting outside. It was kind of a place built for creative ideation. And so that was really interesting to me. And I wrote a lot of music there. I actually wrote the song that introduced me to my wife at a cafe in college. It would be years later that I would perform it, but that song was written at a coffee shop, drinking. I think I was at Caribou or something, and it was like a campfire latte. But the idea of like this creative space was really fascinating to me, and then it was compounded upon by the people, the baristas, who were like building these interesting ideas, and there was going to be a new menu drop every other month or every season. Kind of felt like you were at a sneaker store or like a streetwear store, because there's this idea of like releasing new ideas for people to consume. And that was really fascinating to me. It was kind of a new idea, and it was something that I wanted to keep pursuing. But the issue that I ran into was just that it wasn't really built for the kinds of ideas I was creating. And I'm
Mm.
fairly used to the concept of code switching, which is like this idea from W.E.B. Du Bois and Souls of Black Folk, that he is a book he wrote. But basically, it just means like you have to change how you present yourself based on other people's perception of blackness. And so I'm used to kind of when I'm in a collegiate space, speaking one way, presenting myself one way. And then when I'm with the homies making music or when I'm mentoring kids in my neighborhood, you kind of switch back to your normal cultural presentation. And so like I would do that in a coffee shop. Like I would come in, you kind of change how you present yourself to match what everybody else is doing. But then in my headphones, I'm writing hip hop lyrics, and I'm kind of blocking out whatever else is happening in the culture or in the cafe. And so it was this weird kind of juxtaposition. And I guess the pain point came when I started to try to bring some of the kids I was mentoring. I was an elementary education major, so I like mentored kids all the way through college. Or I would bring my friends who I do music with, or other kids who are in like the art scene and working on like trying to drop a clothing brand or something. I would bring them to these cafes, and a lot of them were like, I can't get into it. And so that was a problem to me. And I really wanted to figure out a way to present a coffee experience that could share what I was loving about the cafe experience and kind of, to be honest, what I was creating in my own mind. I was bringing, I was basically putting my headphones on and creating this imaginary world. I wanted to figure out a way to make that world visible and tangible so that the people in my community could see themselves in that space as well and kind of experience what I was experiencing on the inside.
That's great. Abby, what was your first inclination to say, well, this is the most important part of my vision, the thing that you were creating while you were in those cafes? When you took the first step to try to make that idea a reality, what was the most important thing about that idea that you wanted to manifest first?
I mean, the most important thing to me was that people felt inspired to genuinely create. And I think I wanted people to have the opportunity to create without having to code switch, because to me, I felt like there's a degree of ingenuity or creativity that's kind of lost in that process, that translation process. It kind of honestly reminds me of like I used to teach a lot of like English language learner students, especially when I was in the suburbs of Chicago. And like, we would talk through like having to translate different words or having access to translations to words or trying to find parallels from like one culture to another. But you always lose a little bit in
Yeah.
translation. And I kind of wanted my community not to have to lose that. And that was the big idea for me in like trying to create this experience. And I think it was compounded upon by this idea or notion that like the original coffee culture, right? The pre-colonial coffee culture, the indigenous coffee culture was one where that was not necessary. And I wasn't sure at the time. Obviously, I hadn't been to Africa yet. This is like 2010, but I was seeing the names on these bags, and all the names on the bags of these farmers were, African or Latin American or Asian. And it really made me curious to see, like, I don't see any of these people behind the bar. None of their music is playing on the speakers. None of their cultures are represented in the beverages. What does their coffee culture look like? And maybe that coffee culture is a better environment for my community to see themselves or to find themselves in. And so I was really just curious and fascinated with like what that could look like. I hadn't seen what it looked like, but I had an idea that like there was something possible that, my community hadn't experienced, maybe the world hadn't fully embraced yet. And that kind of took me down the rabbit hole to start looking into the history of coffee.
So you said that kind of first started around 2010 when you
Mm-hmm.
started to get those
Yeah.
ideas, but then you founded Coffee Black in 2019. So
Yeah.
the better part of a decade spent, kind of mulling this over and thinking about it, but also I imagine taking some steps to not only learn but also do. So what were those foundational steps you took to begin what would be Coffee Black, to kind of crystallize and put a finer point on the idea so that once it kind of entered into the world as it is as
Yeah.
it did in 2019, people are like, that's what that is.
Yeah, I mean a lot of this is it eerily mirrors, my songwriting process. So, you have this melody in your head or a set of lyrics in your head, and the time between that and the final mixed and mastered version of the song can be very complex. And I personally went through a lot of different ways to try to get a song finished. I used to just sit down and write what I thought the whole song was. But oftentimes when I would write it down, I would find out like, oh, that version of the song is not the actual song. Like there's a more uh, congruent version of this song inside of it. So I'm reading this book, 10X is Better Than 2X. And they talk a lot about like Michelangelo, and they talk a lot about all these different like classical artists, Renaissance artists. And they're talking about this one brother he's doing these sculptures, and like he's like there's a version the way to reveal what this really is just take out everything that is not Hercules or everything that is not David, or whatever the figure was he was painting. And I feel like that's kind of the process of songwriting, and there's several iterations of like removing what it isn't. And sometimes you have to like do one version, take a step back, look at it, oh, that's not it. And eventually I got better at it, but I think Cxffeeblack was the same, and that like I would just try different versions of it out in my neighborhood or with kids I was mentoring or with my friends. One of the ones I talk about a lot is like I'm moving back to Memphis. It's like 2016. I've been going to like cafes at every city I'm visiting. When we're traveling with my wife, I'm trying a bunch of drinks. I'm kind of like doing these like weird beat making pour over videos on Instagram. They might still be floating around, but I'm just trying to figure out how do I present this possible version of a future in a way that's compelling to people who honestly don't see themselves in coffee shops, in a way that says this is what coffee would have been had the process of coffee spreading not been interrupted by colonialism, right? What if it had come through, genuine trade and relationships across Africa, across the Middle East, across Asia, even to the America? Is like, what would that world have looked like? And I'm a big nerd, so I'm into like multiverse theories and all these kinds of things. But I was really curious about like, what would that world have looked like? And really, I felt strongly that world would be a world where so many more people would find themselves like coffee nerds, quote unquote, if we can define what that term is. And so I was just iterating. It's like going to open mics. I was doing these like coffee interviews with Black baristas. Whenever I met a Black barista, I'd like take a picture with them, do a quick post on Instagram. I would make a beat that reminded me of that person and like put it in the background, and then do a brew recipe that kind of to me captured the essence. So all these things I was kind of taking my intuition as a creative or as a producer or a rapper, and trying to use coffee as the means or medium through which I expressed an idea versus like a song or a beat or things like that. And then we would do these open mics where I called them coffee ciphers. So I would like find a coffee shop, invite a bunch of artists out. We would do improvisational music or a cipher. And then we would also like all gather around the bar and like share brew recipes, or I would walk people through how to brew. And I had, as a teacher, there's kind of something called like a I do, a we do, and a you do. So it's like a 3-step process to teach someone. So first you show them the thing, then you do the thing together, and then they have a chance to do it. And at the end, they have a better opportunity to like master the concept. So I would do that with like, I would lay a whole bunch of coffees out. I would try to get as many coffees from like Black roasters or brown roasters or roasters of color as I could. So I remember one of the ones I had like coffee from Red Bay. I had some coffee from Bean Fruit down in Mississippi. I think I had maybe some of Propaganda's coffee. I don't know. I just tried to grab whoever I could. I put them all out on the table. I put a bunch of different brewers, and I would just tell people, hey, let's make a decision together. So part of my learning theory as an educator was this thing called critical pedagogy, which is from a brother named Paulo Freire. And so he's all about like a decolonized learning methodology where you're not censoring one person as the authority on knowledge, but we make knowledge together. So he calls it a co-generative dialogue. We're dialoguing together to cooperatively generate meaning. And all that basically means is we're working together. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I love about his writing, but we would do that through coffee. So instead of me telling you which coffee to pick, we would all pick a coffee. And I was like, hey, you can chew the beans if you want to, you can smell them. And then they would just pick the coffee as a group. And then I would say, how do you guys want to brew it? Which one looks more interesting? They would pick the brewer. And then I would say, well, hey, this is how I do it. It's not the ultimate way, but this is a way that I do it, a way. And then we would go together, and I'll say, is there anything you got? We would taste it, talk about it. And then I would say, is there anything you guys want to change? Right. And so then they would decide on that. And in the background, I have a DJ playing music, it's a vibe. And then at the end, it's like, okay, now it's a free for all. You guys do whatever you want. And the only thing that I'm asking is that you talk about what you taste, and so we would create these conversations, which is like, I guess kind of like not favorable. I found out later in like a cupping scenario, it was supposed to be like super quiet and like, no distractions sensorily. But I was like, yo, we turn it up right now. And then after all that caffeine, we would make music together. So we would like improvise music, we freestyle, and then we sit down and talk about what questions they have. What are you still curious about? And I did a bunch of those starting out. Still had no coffee. I was just dropping music, and this was kind of like a way to one, introduce my music as an independent artist. Two, make a little extra money than I could make off a single on Spotify. And three, like build community and empower people to say like, hey, you can do this too, and you have your own ideas that are worth exploring. Which is
Yeah.
the notion that coffee kind of brought to me. I don't think there was a particular cafe that brought that idea to me, but it was, I think, something inside of me that coffee called out. The actual substance itself. There was some creative ideation that was coffee was stimulating within me, and I don't think that's a new thing with me. I think we see across histories, across cultures, like coffee is it stimulates revolution in a lot of ways. And it was doing that in me, and I felt like I wanted to create a space that did that on purpose. And so that's what Coffee Black originally, that was what it was up until 2019. It was like a bunch of different versions of that, really cringy Instagram videos, interviews with baristas, trying a bunch of different coffees, signed up for spending way too much money on coffee. Honestly, my wife was pretty upset. She was like, yo, do you ever just want to like be a coffee roaster? Because you're spending a lot of money on coffee and grinders. But she honestly started my habit. Like, she bought my first espresso machine when we got married in 2014. And I'm like, hey, this is your fault, yo. You gave me permission to spend money on coffee, so we're kind of here now.
Yeah. I love the co-creative element of what your pursuits were during those years. It you taking these ideas from other people and creating community and learning in that way where it's collaborative. We've always said that coffee shops are even if you have a really strong business plan, your shop's not going to look like that in 5 years because it by necessity
Mm,
has to be a product of the people interacting with each other, and it's a unique expression in the universe that's just going to be never repeated again. And that
mm,
you leaned into that is wonderful. I'm reminded of a lot of people, like a DJ who would be like a cut and paste artist who takes other elements of music and has an idea of what they want it to sound like in some form, but also is allowing
yeah.
the musical uh, elements that they're drawing from to add that color or that texture to it. And it's got to be difficult to make that move in 2019 to say, with branding and with polish and a megaphone, like, this is Coffee Black. After getting a
Yeah.
lot of that experience, it almost, I mean, does it feel like a betrayal of the collaborative element or just an honoring of it in the best way you know how?
Yeah. To me, it felt like hip hop. It felt like sampling. It felt like trying to find these core ideas within a larger composition and reflect that on the new rhythmic landscape. You know what I'm saying? So like sampling, you'll take a old Otis Redding record or Stax Soul record from Memphis, and you're not trying to recreate that idea, but you're trying to, create its descendant. You're trying to create the next step in the evolution of that idea, and maybe an idea that the original creator didn't think of, but that was present, that's congruent with yourself. And so it really felt like a remix, a series of remixes. And I think that continued until we had a new thing. One thing I don't ever talk about is that there's like 5 phases of Coffee Black, and we're currently in phase 3. My wife, I remember I
Mm.
explained this to my wife last year, and she was like, why did you never tell me this? And it's just like part of my brain to like the creative process to have these different versions that I want to bring into the world. So like the first version of Coffee Black was literally about like the substance and encouraging people to be willing to drink their coffee black. And so it was literally about, the seeds, right? And the value of the seed and the value of the beverage, and being educated and curious about the way we prepare it. And that's where a lot of that language, like if you brew better, you do better, or no sugar, no cream, please, or even like the first t-shirt we did said like single origins. And that's because like, I was coming from a musical perspective. So I had to make merch for my music. And so I was kind of trying to find a correlation between what I was saying musically and like the process of making coffee and getting people to appreciate that. And then we transitioned to like Black people, right? And that's where we started to focus a lot more on the history behind the bean. And that's where I think, always giving honor to like the Oromo people for hosting me in Ethiopia, to my Ethiopian brothers and sisters, really of all ethnicities, who treat us with so much love and educating me about the Gada system and who are the Abagadas and the Adasinkes and what is Bunakala and, the Ethiopian coffee blessing of Bunaf Nagea Hendabina. Like all this indigenous knowledge, I think really empowered me to see that there is a version of coffee, there's a language around coffee that's actually congruent with my own like spiritual experience with coffee, my own creative experience with coffee, that had not been articulated to the world, because when coffee was taken from Yemen, no one took the blessings that were shared as well. And I think it's a fascinating thing, just as a side note. Like there's this whole 2,000-year-old spirituality around coffee that I'm learning about from the Oromo people in Ethiopia. And when I met my brother Mokhtar, who is the owner of Port of Mocha, he was one of our earliest supporters. I think Keba from Red Bay like showed him one of our hoodies that said like Ethiopia, Yemen, Kenya, Coffee Black, and it was basically just about like the origins of coffee globally, indigenously, and also personally with my own coffee story, starting with my dad in Kenya. But I remember asking him like about a lot of the history of coffee in Yemen, and he was one of the first people to tell me like, yeah, we received coffee from Ethiopia. And then he went on to tell me at the Boston SCA that there's a whole like Islamic coffee blessing that is present with how people consume it. And I was like, man, there's this history. If we're thinking about music, there's a cipher happening, and kind of in the game of telephone, like, Ethiopia kicks off the beat. They pass the microphone to Yemen. Yemen starts saying their own thing, and then it gets interrupted by colonialism. So we don't get to see the full version of that song where people are able to find themselves in coffee and create culturally congruent expressions of it that kind of like follow the heritage of coffee through different cultures, and as it adapts to different soils and creates its own notes. Instead, after Yemen, we kind of get this very brutalistic, consumeristic progression of coffee just being about what it can do for you. And while there's still an essence, like all the revolutions that came from coffee in Europe and all these things, which is beautiful, right? Like in the ways that coffee enculturates itself in Latin American communities, some Caribbean communities, even in places like New Orleans with Rose Nicole. Like you don't really get the full cultural expression that we see in those communities that had it without like a whip over their back to produce this product. And to me, it was really, really sad, but it also was an opportunity to imagine what could happen if we went back to that. If we rewound the clock and went back to the original notes, the original sample, what kind of melodies could be created by different cultures interacting with that. And I think that as we moved into the second wave of Coffee Black, or the second phase of Coffee Black, like that became what I was really interested in, like sharing this history and acknowledging, the painful anti-Black, anti-Indigenous history of it, but also choosing to see that there's a different story possible with this product, and that the originators, the original stewards of this product, kind of showed us the way, and it's still available if we're willing to listen to them. And that began like the next phase of phase two, where I was like, okay, what does coffee mean for like Black people globally, and acknowledging the history of slavery in coffee. And now we're kind of in phase, I feel like that was like 2020 through 2022, 23. And now we're entering into phase three, which is the Honor Your Root campaign, which is saying like, yes, we must acknowledge like coffee itself is worthy of honor. The people who are the root of this product are worthy of honor, like the indigenous folks, but also like all of us have something as unique seeds in and of ourselves that's worthy of honoring. And that if we acknowledge our roots and honor our roots, we're actually better able to enjoy the fruit that it produces, because that is true sustainability, right? Like the seeds that fall on the ground, the fruit that falls on the ground, part of the reason why we leave that is so it can decompose and nourish the soil and then feed back into the life of the root. But under capitalism, we've all kind of received this like hyper productive mindset where we strip everything from a plant, from ourselves, in order to just be more productive. And I think that ultimately that leaves a tree with no fruit to produce, because you starved the root. We've taken everything, all the nutrients, and kind of moved it away from the essence. And so there's two more phases. I'm not even going to get into that. Maybe I'll get to do those before I die. But just, yeah, this process has been like this journey of like taking these ideas and kind of seeing what is the evolution, of them, and how can each one of these processes produce something that's enjoyable and valuable, for the world.
Mm. I like that you mentioned enjoyable, because I mean that is really the reason why fruit exists, isn't it? It's a
Come on. Yeah.
nourishment, and it feels as though it's a reimagining of what fruit, or being fruitful, or bringing something to fruition can be. And we've with lots of people I talk with coaching and whatnot, we've been talking a little bit about the seasonality of natural processes, where there's dips and there's peaks, and there's to get like biblical, like in the Old Testament they talk about letting the land lie fallow for a year to let it rest, for example.
Yeah. The year of
Counterintuitive to
Jubilee,
the hyper
right?
productivity. Yes, exactly. And there's
Yeah.
this wisdom to that requires you to take perspective of something, and slow down a little bit enough to be educated by what it is you're putting your hand to. Um, so when you're talking about connecting to your roots and allowing that to influence how you see fruit, how you produce fruit, uh, in the daily, we talk about the industry in coffee, and we always talk about this in some large amorphous title like the industry. So it's kind of unfair to ask the question, but I guess in the industry, what kind of changes do you want this narrative shift to bring about that will create more flourishing in communities?
I love that you used the word flourishing. Wheaton College was like a faith-based college, and so the idea of flourishing and like culture care was kind of presented to me in undergrad, and it stuck with me a lot in the way that I think about our work and our business, and what it's responsible to do. And on a very simple level, I think when we honor the fruit, we get better. When we honor the root, we allow it to produce better fruit. And I think that's what I hope happens in our industry. I think that the idea of monocultural overcropping is honestly a great metaphor for what we see in the coffee industry. Like, it's kind of boring sometimes. And I think when I first got into coffee, I was super excited because it seemed like there was this endless possibility. That's honestly why there's an X in our name, is because the X represents the missing variable. And I think the honoring of that variable gives an opportunity to open the door to almost an endless possibility of possible futures, right? Like, you can change the temperature by 1 degree, 2 degrees. You can change the grind size by 1 macron. You can change the processing methodology ever so slightly, and it produces this endless array of like beautiful futures for our palates to enjoy, um, rather than what normally happens, which is like, a lot of folks just, before they even get to know what is there, or get a chance to taste the notes or the possibilities, they automatically add sugar and cream, to it, and that creates this kind of like very standardized flavor profile, but it also creates a really boring coffee experience to me. And so I think like within the industry, we've kind of OD'd on, you know, Norwegian minimalism. I'm kind of, you know what I'm saying? I feel like we've OD'd on, you know what I'm saying? Edison
Yeah.
lights and white bags, or
Mm,
black bags and white backgrounds, and like we had. And I feel like
yeah.
part of the reason why is because we haven't listened to the root. Like, there's such a variety of expression, even in coffee, right? Like, there's 120 species of coffee plus right now, all indigenous to the continent of Africa. We've only really played with two of them. We're just really starting to play with Conifera. Like, we've just played with Arabica primarily because that's the seed that was stolen to kind of kickstart the capitalistic expression of coffee. And part of the reason why I'm so fascinated with learning from like indigenous communities in coffee is because there's this like opportunity to have such a wider array of expression. And I think if we would listen and share and be in community with, there's such an opportunity to have much more enjoyable things. So even with varietals, it's crazy to me that we have, you know, Sudan Rume as a varietal that wins all these competitions, and there's no Sudanese people present to give any insight or input or like offering of ideas, even though they steward the land on which this varietal was created. And I know there's a lot of geopolitical reasons for that, but as an artist, I'm just thinking about the expression where the world has missed out on. And I think also, as a descendant of American slaves, I think about how the genius of my ancestors oftentimes was like relegated to just creating new solutions for their own survival versus innovating the land and the crops that they were on. And so like my great grandfather was not a sharecropper in a time where most people were sharecroppers. And he was able to find access to land. About 90 acres is what our family history says. And that legacy of him being able to create business solutions has passed down to my grandfather, who was an entrepreneur, my dad, who's like a salesman and an entrepreneur and an artist and a writer. And it's come down to me. And I think like, man, how much better and interesting would the world be if all of these people's creative genius was able to actually produce ideas for the marketplace rather than being the silent engine for the products brought to the marketplace. And I hope that in our industry, we acknowledge like, not just the fact that, yes, it is wrong, to oppress people. Yes, it is wrong to marginalize people. Yes, it's wrong to use slave labor to produce, the coffee that we consume, or to neocolonialism to be this driving engine. But I also want people to know, like, you're missing out. It's not just a issue of like, this is wrong and you should change it, but also this could be so much more interesting and we're settling. And I just think about like the opportunities and the ideas that could be brought to the market. And one of my mentors is a brother named Twiz. He's like the first Black person to win the U.S. Barista of the World Latte Art Championship. And he came to the hood and did training with like 25 Black kids like a couple years ago. And that was really the beginning of the Anti-Gentrification Cxffee Club, which we can get into. But one of the things he was telling me is how much Puerto Rico has influenced like latte art styles, and how people like nicely have innovated with like what is standardized now. And I just think about like, so many other cultures have so much to offer, but we don't really frame coffee as for those people, even though it's so often from them. And I'm excited for that possibility. And I hope that what we're doing really presents the idea of saying like, we have so much to learn from origin, instead of framing origin as a place we need to save, though there are things that need to be corrected, or as a place where we need to go educate so that they can do it right and do it better. I'm like, they had a pretty good thing like going prior to colonialism. You know what I'm saying? I think that's the reason why people wanted it so much, is because it was dope. And I want to live in a world where the rest of that dopeness gets to come to the forefront,
Hey everyone, it's Chris again, and we'll be right back with our episode with Bartholomew Jones. But I wanted to talk to you about one of our sponsors today over at groundcontrol.coffee. And this brewer now is in its second iteration. There's a new version of the brewer out. It's got 30% higher output for batched espresso concentrate and cold brew. This means not only is this machine, as always, it's been a game changer for batch brew coffee, but it's also been a game changer for what you can do with a machine, namely creating these extracts that allow you to create batched iced lattes and batch cold brew from one machine. So go check them out at groundcontrol.coffee and see if this is the right fit for your cafe. If you're looking for elevation of quality and efficiency in your equipment, then this is the kind of thing that you should be looking into. Check them out again over at groundcontrol.coffee. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that most of you know what the Barista series is. It is kind of like the cornerstone and foundation of plant-based beverages as we know it. The performance line of plant-based beverages from the Barista series is unique in that it has been created for and tested by amazing baristas around the world. Each one of their products is meticulously crafted so that it performs on the bar. So it stands up to the heat from steaming, produces awesome texture for latte arts, and it also keeps the balance of the beverage focused on the coffee, which is huge. That's kind of like the trifecta of what you want to happen with a plant-based beverage. So great taste, great performance, consistency. Check them out at pacificfoodservice.com. And really, you should just get samples and try them in your shop and make the decision yourself. I think you're really going to be impressed. So if you're looking for the best plant-based beverages for your customers, then I think you should be looking at the Barista series from Pacific. So now we are going to return back to our episode, continuing our conversation with Bartholomew Jones of Cxffeeblack. I love this idea, the rootedness, especially with the expressions of coffee in cafes, where you have people exploring how to bring themselves and their community through the menu, through the decor, the branding, the space, the
Yes.
hospitality provided. All of that is the product of a coffee shop, and it's the product of, I mean, the coffee as well, the coffee itself, but how it's consumed is more than just in the cup. It's also the idea around it. And so we have a lot of problems in coffee, the idea of shops opening and closing, and this churn of entities. And when you talk about, it could be so much more than what we have available to us. And I'm 100% with you. I mean, I have succulents in my house, and I have, some blonde wood stuff. Not nearly as much as some coffee
Yeah.
shops, but but I'll say there's a difference between uh, more and better, or we could have more, and we do actually try to get more locations and more coffee shops and bigger
Yeah.
and all that stuff, but all in a pursuit of maybe we just need something that's more fulfilling. We don't need as many. We just need
Mm.
something that's more fulfilling and more rooted in the community. It'll last a lot longer than just a few years, because if you're honoring your roots, then you're probably going to be resonating with a bunch of other people too who want to interact with that are
Hmm.
directly related to that root, but also may not be, because as people, just human beings, we recognize authenticity. We
Yeah.
recognize something that's really real. And so I find this message of rootedness and honoring the root being such a hopeful thing for people to latch onto, especially today. Um, when you talk about the Anti-Gentrification Coffee Club, I would like to talk about that. It feels like it leads right into that idea a little bit. What's that all about?
Yeah, it started out as a joke. Like most of the stuff we've done, it's like in the studio, you're hanging out with friends, you're just kind of talking about whatever's happening in the world, and coffee comes into the joke. So, when we started Gucci Mane, if we were in the studio, we ran out of coffee, and we make coffee in the studio. Like, some people roll up other plants, and so like there's a lot of coffee being drank, and we really wouldn't make music without it, and so we ran out of coffee and we had to go to some like gentrified coffee shop down the street, and it just threw the vibe off, threw the creative process off. And so we got some good coffee. I think it was from Camber coffee, but we were like, man, what if there was a coffee brand that made sense here? And we were all big fans of like Ethiopian Guji coffees. That's like one of the more popular like newer coffee selling regions anyway in Ethiopia. They've been growing coffee, but we was like, man, it would probably be called Gucci Mane. It was a joke, and then it became our best selling product. Um, and the same thing with Gold Brew, right? It was like, yo, it's not cold brew, it's Gold Brew. I told you, and then it became a thing. Like it was kind of just like a little saying we would do for our version of a coffee Arnold Palmer. And the same thing with the Anti-Gentrification Coffee Club, like this 2021, 2022. The brand, we've already dropped the Love Black People Like You Love Black coffee shirts to raise money for activists who were getting thrown in jail during the George Floyd protests. And that kind of put our brand on the national in the national conversation. And so we're having a lot of work just fulfilling, coffee and shirts out of our house. And I'm working with one of my brothers, Kenny Baker, who has a brand called Ethnos Coffee. We were like roasting with him, roasting Gucci Mane with him out like 40 minutes away in the suburbs, and then driving back to my house and pressing a bunch of t-shirts and like the Omarion, who's like one of the younger guys I mentored. He was in like 6th grade at the time. He's like helping me print T-shirts. My wife is fulfilling orders, and it's just life is really busy. So we don't have a physical front. It's also the middle of the pandemic, right? So there's no coffee shops are closing left and right, and they're like, hey, you should open a coffee shop. Like I don't think I want to do that. And also, it's pretty common knowledge that they're like 4 horsemen of the gentrification apocalypse. You got like Whole Foods, you have craft breweries, small ladies walking even smaller dogs, and coffee shops. And so I'm like, this is gonna send up like, the soccer mom bat signal to like come and be in our neighborhood. And it's not that we have a problem with other people who aren't from our neighborhood being in our neighborhood. Memphis is kind of notorious for being super friendly, almost sometimes too friendly to people who are visiting. It's like a through place, a passing through place. But it was more so the issue of like when people come, they kind of want to be here without us being here. And that was the concern that I had seen in other cafes that had opened up. I'd seen in gentrified neighborhoods. It's like you're in the middle of like this, in the hood, and yet there's no people from the hood there, and then there's all these little signals that you're not welcome, like, oh, no cash on premises. What does that mean? It means, hey, there's nothing for you to rob here. So, you know what I'm saying? And if you're poor and you don't have a bank account, we can't serve you here. And maybe that's not what was intended, but, the message still comes across. And like, what kind of music is playing? Is it the music that's playing 3 houses down the street? Probably not. What are the prices available? It's the layman soundtrack. Yeah. So it's just all these different things that like kind of told people you don't belong here. Who's hired behind the bar? Is anybody from the neighborhood, invited to apply, or is it just a bunch of, kids with purple and green hair who like, just got back from college or whatever? Like, it's just nobody there who looks like they're from the neighborhood on top of all the other things I mentioned. And so I was like, I don't want to do that. And even if I'm behind the bar, and even if it's, I'm playing music that I want to see, like, I just don't know if people will know, hey, our neighbors are censored here and you're welcome to come have a table with us, but you can't change the menu, and I don't know if people would know that. So we was like, well, it wouldn't be a coffee shop. It would be like an anti-gentrification coffee club. Ha ha ha. You know what I'm saying? It was a joke. And now we have a sign that says it. So I guess it's here to stay. But it was more so about like exploring this idea of a coffee shop that we had never seen before. And now, we've had our first full year last year of being open with like regular hours. Because in the process of ideating, I had a bunch of terrible ideas that I thought would make it an anti-gentrification coffee club. I was like, yeah, we're not going to have espresso because that's the colonizer's machine. And then, one of my, and then my neighbor came in and we would do like espresso on Wednesdays. And La Marzocco had let us hold David from La Marzocco. I don't think he's with him anymore, but he had let me like borrow a GS3. And so we would just use it for educational purposes on Wednesdays. And one of my neighbors, Mr. George, was like so happy every time we gave him. I remember Starbucks dropped like the shaken ice brown sugar or whatever. So we did like a bootleg version of it and called it like the D'Angelo, because it's like a brown sugar, D'Angelo brown sugar, babe. But he was so happy when he got that drink. And like after a while, like, I'm being an ideologue, like I'm being a jerk. This isn't a paper in undergrad. This is real life. Who cares? You know what I'm saying? Like, espresso tastes good with milk and sugar. And so why would I deny my neighborhood that? So we started carrying espresso, and then I would have these like, well, we're only going to be open, like we're going to have irregular hours, so people from outside the community won't know when we're open. But if you live here and you walk down the street every day, you'll see me, and then I can just serve you, and you won't have to pay for anything. We'll give you the coffee for free. Because in Ethiopia, traditionally people wouldn't pay for coffee, right? Like, it's a sharing. The idea of the Bunakala ceremony is you're sharing peace with someone. Bunafnagea Hendabina means may your house lack no coffee nor peace, or wherever there's coffee, there must also be peace. How can I charge you to have peace? You know what I'm saying? And so we created this phygital model. I call it a phygital model. But basically, we invited a bunch of people online to join our coffee subscription to pay forward the cost of serving coffee in our community. And that worked for a while, especially during the pandemic. We're actually about to do a big push to try to get more subscribers back onto the program so we can continue this kind of first sip free model. But it was really interesting because like a year later, one of the guys around town who I knew like was at another coffee shop which shall not be named, and he was let go for very, in my opinion, anti-black reasons. And so he was like, "Hey, I need a job." I'm like, "Hey, I need a manager because I have these weird hours and we're not making enough money." So he decided to be there at the shop, every day. And so now we've had regular hours and we're a year into kind of transforming into what is probably more of a traditional coffee shop. I still feel like it's a coffee club. It's like the community living room. And now we just launched a community profit share campaign where 321 people invested around $100 each. And so now we have the cash to share 4% of our revenue with them so that we can build a new cafe, like an actual cafe. And that's the thing I haven't done before. Like, okay, this is it hasn't been a coffee shop for so long. And it's been this place of like communal empowerment. It's been a safe space. It's been a place of mourning when people like Tyree Nichols were murdered by the police here. It's been a creative space. We host like coffee ciphers, that idea I told you about, earlier in the interview. We still try to keep that alive. We host a coffee cipher at the last Friday of every month at the cafe, and have got to introduce so many people to like the indigenous history of coffee, and like train new baristas through like an internship program that we run every year, and like done a lot of amazing stuff. But we're just running out of room. And so it's like, we were in this burned down, abandoned building in our neighborhood that was rehabbed by our community development organization. And now it's like we need a fuller space. And we need a space for a bigger roaster. We've been roasting on like a 10-pound fluid bed artisan, and now we're trying to graduate to a what are we graduating to? A 33-pound roaster from Civets, still a fluid bed roaster. And so that's going to be the second push for our capital raise. The second round of community investment is to like get that roaster and build out our capacity and grow our supply chain and stuff like that. And it's kind of a new thing for me, man. Like, we've been doing this concept for so long. I've said it's not a coffee shop. So now I'm like, well, what does a coffee shop that honors our root look like? And that's going to be a whole new process of iteration and making mistakes and freestyling until we get there.
I was excited to see the drawings. I think you posted them up on Instagram or somewhere. I saw the schematics for what the building is going to look like. It looks pretty nice. And just knowing the history of your business, your ideas, the movement itself, going into a space like that, already it's going to be something that it almost feels like you'd have to work pretty hard to not honor your roots at this point. It's
sure.
just kind of the way that you've gone about raising the capital for it as a community space by the community and for the community. So I'm kind of interested to see how this comes to fruition. Use that word again. What is it that you really hope that this space, I mean, you may have already, it might be a repeat of what you just said, but I guess the coffee shop now that you're opening is the Anti-Gentrification Coffee Club, or whatever you end up calling your Cxffeeblack. What is it that you want the community locally to, the message you want to send to them, and what they want to feel when they come in there? But also, the industry is watching. People who are inspired to do the same thing, open coffee shops, honor their roots, and iterate the way you have. So there's two groups of people. There's the locals. How do you want them to feel about this and interact with it? And then this community, the coffee shop people, the coffee professionals in the industry.
Yeah. Our manager, Brashard, said something really interesting when we were like seeing the new space being fully developed. It's white box now, so the renderings that you've seen are now what the building looks like, right? We got HVAC, we got electricity, we have plumbing. Only thing left is like the bar, decor, permits. And he said like we've built the community's living room, but now we're stepping into the community's dining room. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to describe what we hope like the Cxffeeblack flagship, Cxffeeblack HQ is, because we are closing the Anti-Gentrification Coffee Club. Like, that wasn't just like a hook. The name is changing. and the Anti-Gentrification Coffee Club is going to become something else. I hope that it becomes like a virtual community of people who are curious about doing coffee in different ways that honor the communities that they're in. And I hope that we can start, providing consulting with different people in the industry who are like, hey, I live in this neighborhood, or I'm curious about building in the neighborhood, and I don't want to contribute to the displacement of the root that's there. We hope to be able to like airdrop you a AGCC box where you can just build out your own community and use that to then iterate your way towards your own coffee concept that honors its root. And so that's kind of what we hope with the industry, is that we're able to introduce people. We're actually launching like this subdomain space where we're looking to really like start connecting with people who want to do stuff like that. And so hopefully by the time this comes out, we'll have a link to invite people to go check that out. But in our own space, the idea of a dining room is really beautiful. And this is also like a lot of the iteration we've done is with feedback from community members. And so the espresso was because my neighbors really wanted it. And to some degree, even though the coffee club has been intentionally not a coffee shop, a lot of my neighbors, especially the older ones, have like been like, yeah, that's cool, but like I want a place that feels like I'm being honored. Not just in the way we brew our coffee or the fact that we give the Ethiopian coffee blessing every time, but like how nice it is. And that's something that originally I was kind of worried about, because I thought it would signal to a bunch of people from outside our community, hey, come here and ignore everybody here. But in a lot of ways, our community has said, yeah, but we want a place that's like beautiful and for us. And the AGCC is beautiful in and of itself. We call it like the coffee black hole. It's a magical place, to quote Coulson from Agents of Shield. But I think that there's something else we can experience, and we think about like our grandmothers a lot and how we want people to feel. So like that living room or that porch aesthetic where everybody pulls up and talks is beautiful. But grandma also had a dining room with like plastic all over the couches, and you can only sit there on Thanksgiving, or there was a special china that came out the cabinet, and that's a part of our history. That's a part of our root too. And I think I'm really excited to build out what that looks like through coffee. So we'll still have we actually have updated renderings that'll be in a like upcoming video we're going to be dropping. So check that out. But maybe we can link it. But there's like different portions. So we keep the living room aesthetic when you first walk in, and then there's a family dining table there for people to sit down. We're going to be building out some food options, not super complex because I have no interest in being a restaurant, but some more heartier foods than just wrap snacks and pound cake. Even though I love wrap snacks and pound cake, I love what we're doing right now. And then there'll be a bar, and the purpose of the bar is to actually be a permanent place for this co-generative dialogue, where the vision for the bar is that we can have a DJ behind the bar, a barista behind the bar, a bunch of creatives around the bar, and we can share ideas, we can share art, we can create, we can talk. You can, try different coffees, try what the barista is excited about, different brew methodologies, new processing methods on the coffee, but it's a place for an exchange of ideas. And then, of course, we'll have the roaster there as well, so that people can visually see where this coffee is coming from. If we're able to raise our full capital amount, we also have this vision for like a modular supply chain outside. And one of the bigger complaints in the neighborhood is there's no parks on our side of the neighborhood. So the street, National Street, where the cafe is, traditionally was a redlining street. And so if you lived on the west side of that street, you were black or not white. And if you lived on the east side of that street, is where the bank would approve loans for white people in the community who were just coming back from World War II and giving the GI Bill. And so I feel like this shop is a way to bring these communities together and to bridge the gap. And part of the complaint is on our side of the neighborhood, there's no parks, right? And so what do working parents do when they want to come to the cafe? We want to have a place where those people can come together and sit, and there's something for their kids to play with. So on one hand, yeah, it's a playground, but two, it's like a little map between Africa and America and the ocean, and little modular boats with containers on top of them that kids can play with. Nice. And growing some coffee plants, or having some like plastic or foam cotton plants that people can see, and you can put the little berries in the container and like move it across the boat, and there's a little version of Coffee Black HQ. there as well, and you can see the little roaster, and like those are the kinds of things we want to build for our community, so that really we can see a vision of coffee as I believe God intended, where it's for the people, and not just from them. So
Beautifully said. That's awesome. I'm so excited to see that come
thank
to
you, bro.
fruition. I'm grateful that you've taken so much time to kind of share your heart and these ideas and all that has been accomplished through your dream and the community that you've gathered around this. How can we stay in touch with everything to just stay updated and connected?
Yeah, for sure. The best way is like through our WeFunder. I post like bi-weekly updates on what we're doing. I'm starting this new series, like 10-minute Black Coffee Facts with Coffee Black. Let me say it again: 10-minute Black Coffee Facts with Coffee Black, where I just talk about like industry issues from the perspective of a rapper with one of the young guys from our neighborhood, and he kind of interviews me. So it's really interesting, and we're sharing those perspectives. Um, and yeah, we're raising $1.2 million to like honor our root in coffee. We're 223K there. And so people can follow that journey. It's going to be exciting. I think it's going to change the way people think about coffee in communities, and it's going to build wealth with our neighborhood instead of just extracting wealth from it, which I think is really cool. You can also sign up for this new subdomain project by like just putting your email in on our website. Going to be doing that's going to be the future of like coffee and community for all things Coffee Black. You know, our mission is to reclaim the stolen human forward future of coffee, by honoring its indigenous roots. And the first thing I think about when I say that is, how do you do that? And what does that look like? And I think the subdomain is a place where we're going to be talking about resources, getting into primary documents. I'm reading peer review articles about indigenous culture or decolonization, sharing, research and updates. We're doing this Black Barista Exchange program with Vanderbilt, where we're going to be we took phase one, was like us taking 9 Black baristas to Africa, to Ethiopia, Rwanda, to learn about pre-colonial coffee history, to learn about healing from colonial trauma. And now we're going to be hosting at least 4 African baristas here, and taking them on a tour across the United States. So stay tuned with that. There's going to be some coffee drops we're doing to share, and so that people can help pay for tickets and hotels and stuff through buying coffee. And that all is coming down the pipeline, man. So stay tapped in with us via the email and the subdomain, and check out the WeFunder, share it with a friend.
Bartholomew, it's just so much great stuff happening, and I'm just grateful for you. I think a lot of us, hearing this story, we're just grateful for people that follow these inclinations and these ideas, and yeah, just grateful to have you in the industry. And thank you for being on the show. Okay, everybody. Well, I hope that you really enjoyed that conversation with Bartholomew Jones. If you want more information about what's going on at Coffee Black, you just need to go to coffeeblack.com. It's coffee spelled with Cxffee black.com. That's also where you can find them on Instagram at coffee with an X black, Coffee Black on Instagram, and get plugged into all that's happening with the Anti-Gentrification Coffee Club, with Gold Brew. They're really popular canned coffee, and all the other projects that are going on with their fundraising, and just the things that you heard Bartholomew describing here in this conversation is super exciting, groundbreaking stuff that you're going to want to stay plugged into and stay inspired by. Again, just go to coffeeblack.com. You can get linked into all the places that you need to go from there, especially. And a huge thank you to Bartholomew for being a guest on the show today. We so appreciate the hard work that you've been doing, and the mission you have, and the things that you've accomplished thus far. Excited to see what the next phases come to fruition. And speaking of fruition, that's one of the things we did mention many times in this conversation. I would encourage you to really, as a result of listening to this, think about what kind of a difference you can make with your business. Think about the greater mission beyond the transactional. We need to be profitable. We need to make money. We need to do good business, but we also need to do good as well, I think. And a lot of us in coffee do really want that as a not only just a tangential benefit of our business, but for a lot of us, it's one of the main things that we want to have happen as a result of having, lived a life on this earth and created this community and this business. And as long as you keep that before you and you keep rooted in that, what may be the ideal, but open to how it comes to pass, I think Cxffeeblack's example is a great one to follow, because that adds resiliency and strength to your business. And that's the kind of thing that I think we all can learn from. So again, huge thank you to Bartholomew Jones for being on the show. We love that interview. So if you have questions or comments for me about Keys to the Shop or this episode or any other episode, just go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. And we can go ahead and correspond. You can DM on Instagram. I, again, would encourage you to get plugged in by subscribing to the show on both YouTube and on your podcast player of choice. And, one thing I'd love to do is meet you as well. I don't know how many of you are going to be planning to go to Coffee Fest in Los Angeles or in Minneapolis later on this year, but I'm going to be there. I'm at all of these shows. I'm doing lectures and workshops and chats on the show floor, and you can find me there. This, if you're on YouTube, this is what I look like. You'll find me, maybe even wearing the same shirt. But I would love to meet you and just chat with you and see what's going on in your world. It's one of the highlights to the show, getting to meet listeners. But beyond that, I think you need to go to Coffee Fest simply because it is one of the best places to go to get resourced with the right tools and insights to run a great coffee shop. So go to coffeefest.com and get registered today. Go and register yourself and your team and your family members. I mean, whoever else you want to get registered there. But it is worth your time. 100%. The lectures, the trainings, the workshops, all of it is accessibly priced or free, and it's wonderful. So use the code SPK24 and you'll get 50% off general admission to Coffee Fest. So when you sign up for general admission, you can use the code SPK24 and that'll get you 50% off. And hope that's useful to you. So again, hope to see you there. Los Angeles, Minneapolis this year, 2024 at coffeefest.com. Now, that's it. That's our show. I appreciate all of you being here as always. Thank you for supporting the show. And it's been so many years of great conversations. And it's thanks to you and your support. Keep sharing, keep listening. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.